Hi, Allison. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm honored to be part of your podcast. So exciting. This is my first one. So great to be on today.
Perfect. Yeah, I think you have a lot of great insights that I'm excited for you to share, just given your background, your experience, what you're doing. So let's start at the 50,000-foot view. Tell me a little bit about your background, what your role entails today, and really what you're looking at as far as your career in this day and age.
Yeah, so I am currently at Sling TV. We're a live and on-demand streaming service, and Sling is part of the broader Dish corporation. And so I've actually been at Dish over almost 9 years now, which is crazy. I started back as an intern when I was still in college and came out full time, came out to Denver, of course, which was an added plus. And so I've been in tech at Dish for my entire career thus far, and really started with a foundation in customer service and experience, which I think has made me just a stronger employee, especially with my focus in the past few years on product management. And having that really focus on the customer and that background and foundation, I think, has been really valuable in how I approach customer problems, and build solutions for them. And so I've been in product for over 4 years now. Absolutely love it. Love working with engineering, love working with design. Again, being focused on the customer and really having an impact has been great for me personally, and just have been able to grow and be challenged in my career. In addition, I've been very active and involved in diversity and inclusion efforts at the company. Our Dish Women's Network was the first employee resource group. We actually launched just over 6 years ago, which is crazy. And so the Women's Network is something that I got involved in about a year after it launched. And, I was looking for ways that I can better impact the business and stretch myself outside of my job at the time. And really just fell in love with the people leading the network, and it's entirely volunteer ran. All that additional time is on top of everyone's real jobs. And so was able to meet and connect with a lot of people that I would not have had the chance to. I know you and I met through those different efforts. And so, here we are today. But the Women's Network has been a huge part of my career at Dish. And, we started as a group looking to help drive more equal representation across gender at the leadership levels and really empower women. And I've had the fortune and to really grow into leading that organization. And so I started off kind of small, driving membership, and I've now actually been president of the Women's Network over the past 2 years. And when I came in, we were at a point where the network was established with quite a few members, and we've really hit a lot of the goals in focusing on women. And with other employee resource groups coming about, I took the step on, okay, it's not just about women. How do we create an inclusive work environment for everybody, whether it's women of color, LGBTQ plus community, across the board. And so I think partially the intersectionality of many people are women, but there's Latina women, there's Black women, there's gay women. And so really being cognizant of everyone is unique and different, and really being open to diverse perspectives and diversity. People's diversity looks different. And so that's been a big focus the past 2 years. And I think we've been able to come a long way in our conversations and building the community. And, not only having conversations with members and other employee resource groups and employees, but having those conversations with leadership from the executive level on the Dish side on, hey, we need to talk about these things. We need to focus on these things. And it needs to come from the ground up and from the top down.
Right.
So
And I
that was
see
Yeah, sorry, that was a lot of information, but yeah, so happy to
No,
dive
there's
in.
a lot. There's a lot there. I love it. So, it's interesting because you mentioned it. That's how you and I met was, I also worked at Dish and I was a part of the women's network. And even from just a personal experience, I know the support that that network gave to myself, to my other female peers that I was working with. It made a big difference, especially when you're in a male dominated industry. The tech industry, just like, engineering, there's so many industries that are male dominated. And it can be a little bit intimidating, especially as a young woman coming out of college and joining this team, right? Or this industry. But it's important to have this conversation because diversity in thought leads to growth. And I think that's the most important thing that everybody needs to realize, men, women, everyone across the board, because it's that diversity in thought that gives you that well-rounded perspective to help push your organization forward. There's a sociologist named Michael Kimmel who said, gender equality is in the interest of countries, of companies, and of men, their children, and their partners. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not a win-lose. It's a win-win for everybody. And we
Oh,
also know that we can fully empower women and girls by getting the boys and men engaged in the conversation. So that's what I kind of want to focus on today is, providing that perspective and really just, hearing about your experience, but also talking about the different things that Women's Network is doing to help push and move that needle. So tell me a little bit about, you said you started at Dish/Sling 9 years ago. There's a lot that's changed just in the television industry in 9 years. You've gone from regular cable to over the top streaming services, and you've been right there at the forefront with it in the product management side for one of the leading over the top services, Sling, right? So tell me a little bit about the comparison of when you first entered the tech industry. How did you feel as a young woman coming out of college and starting your career compared to fast forward 9 years today? What has that experience been like and what has shifted for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So coming in after school, so I've been somebody, and just kind of going back to my foundation with my family. So I've always been very ambitious. I'm very competitive. I played sports, team sports, growing up my entire life, and thinking kind of on school and how that helped me, be comfortable or be uncomfortable and still be successful kind of diving into my career. Math was my favorite subject growing up, and I, took those more senior classes in my whole life from high school to college. And there are definitely fewer women in math classes. And when I got to business school, definitely fewer women. And so I had that experience with, getting into your first job. Of course, it's, slightly different than just business school projects, but I had that kind of lifelong experience of being one of a very few or being one of only women in group settings. And so I had that a bit of a foundation coming into school. And I think just as somebody, like I mentioned, who's always been ambitious, sometimes overly ambitious um, with plans and such, but I felt confident overall coming in, and was able to navigate that pretty successfully early on. I will say, of course, I think at the time I felt that I was doing better and more comfortable than I probably was in hindsight. And I think there was definitely a level of, my manager was a man, and everybody up in the chain was a man. And working on projects, I was often the only woman. And not only was I young, but having that different perspective, I definitely felt like I needed to prove myself even more and work even harder. And I know that's something that is a pretty common theme with women on, I constantly have to prove myself. Everyone's story varies, and the level of support from leadership, of course, varies. And so I was lucky in my early career. My manager was supportive. Did we have open conversations about diversity and inclusion? No. I think that was something A is early on, and B, that became more of a later passion and a later recognition of myself. But I would say also early on, in hindsight, I would have liked to have either recognized that looking for mentors was key, and to bounce ideas off of. And there wasn't anybody that came to me and was like, "Hey, I want to mentor you." So I think I would have definitely benefited early on from that level of support. And as somebody who's kind of always been pretty independent, I think I, especially early on, was like, I don't need help at all. That's kind of how I operated. And so I've definitely learned over the years, like, you need to ask for help. You can't do everything. And have gotten a lot of, especially when I joined the women's network early on, hearing different women and their experiences and talking about mentorship and talking about raising your hand for things and talking about having those open conversations, like, oh, like I've been doing this alone this whole time. And there's people out there that are feeling the same, and there's also people out there that want to specifically support me. And so I think that evolution of um, building that community and building relationships has infinitely grown from the time that I started to, of course, later in my career. And one of the other key factors that um, came about a couple years ago. So coming in as an intern or post intern to Dish, we particularly don't get paid very much. And I actually tried to negotiate my salary coming in full time and was told that I couldn't. Um, but so we you start pretty low, and for me, my ambitions and growth have, especially early on, were never about money and was never about title. I wanted to do good work. I wanted to make an impact, and of course, I definitely wanted to grow and be promoted. But the money was, nice, and I, was in a position where I didn't have to be concerned with my salary at the time. In hindsight, I don't know how I got by practically, but it wasn't until a couple years later where kind of that base level was so low, and it wasn't just for me. I think it's just for everybody that was an intern, but that base level was so low that and I didn't care, quote unquote, care about the money at the time. And I think that really hurt me moving into my career. And it wasn't until I joined the Sling team and my very, very supportive manager, who's my manager now still, came to me and was like, "Hey, you are, me like exceeding expectations, a super high performer, high contributor, and I want to make sure that you're getting paid your value, and you are extremely underpaid right now." And I was just like, "What?" I had no idea. And that was the point where it is, of course, salary and money is, how you operate in your life and, move forward. And so there's, of course, that factor. But it wasn't until that conversation where I was kind of like, oh, it's not only there's the money side, but it's also I'm contributing so much to the company, and there needs to be a mutual, respect and value provided, and that's I think where that salary comes in. And so that was the first time I recognized, like, oh, okay, like I'm giving more than I'm getting from the company. And so thinking about it that way, I've now moving forward recognize that it's not I want this much money, it's I provide this much value and I'm worth this much. And so that's something else that I've really learned and have been passing on as well to women that I mentor, men that I mentor too, and getting over that discomfort level of talking about money and negotiating. And it's important. And the earlier on in your career that you can be comfortable or get over the uncomfortableness of having those conversations and earning what you deserve and what you're valued, the better, because every single time that you're promoted or move jobs, it's building upon what you've started. And so the more money that you can make earlier on, the better that you'll be, set up for success, later on, especially if you're like me and stay at a company for a long time. That's where it's incredibly important to recognize that early on.
Absolutely. I love that story and kudos to your manager because I mean, it just goes to show that they recognize the value that you're bringing to the company, but also recognize, hey, this isn't fair. We need to level the playing field. So that takes me to, another topic that I wanted to talk about, which is alliances. In that situation, your manager was acting as an ally to you because he could see, somebody else that's in a similar position, is getting paid this much, where you're getting paid this much, and it's bringing the people who are producing at the same level or the people who are producing more than others up to that monetary, I guess, salary, right? And making sure that that gap isn't there just on the basis of X, whatever X is, whether it be, the gender wage gap or it be because you came in as an intern, etc. So tell me a little bit about, that's one example of an ally, right? Is someone who's recognizing, hey, this woman is one of my top producers. She deserves to get paid more, right? What else? How else could somebody be an ally to the people around them, whether it be to females, to African Americans, etc.? How can you be an ally to your peers around you?
Yeah, no, love this question, love this topic. I mean, there's so many different ways, and I know I'm not going to, I'll cover just a subset, but I think it all starts with bias and recognizing that everybody has bias, recognizing that you've bias, that and recognizing what those are. And I think what was exciting to see last year, and one of the events that we typically put on for the Women's Network are training events. And so we've had a variety of unconscious bias training over the last few years. And this was something that we had many conversations with Dish executives on having it be company wide. And last year, the company launched a series of unconscious bias trainings, which definitely a foundation and a first step in the right direction. Training doesn't solve everything, but that was really key in talking about bias. And I think that was something that unconscious bias people were afraid to even talk about and stayed away from. And so that recognition and knowing, there's some science behind it, I think, which is valuable. I mean, bias exists from you know our evolution on how we can make quick decisions, how we can literally recognize that that is a lion and we need to run away from it. It sounds a little cheesy, but the bias is from their automatic and unconscious responses to be able to make decisions, and often quickly. And so I think in a world where we don't need to run away from lions anymore, that still persists. And it's in I'm from Cleveland, and every time in Denver I meet someone from Cleveland, I like vibe and we have that conversation, and I may have a bias toward them because we have a common background, or I snowboard, or other women. There's so many different things that's interests and actions outside of the demographic. And so when it comes to work, I think as well, there's people's backgrounds and different biases can come in, but knowing what your biases are, and that they exist, really step one. And I think going through training. There's tons of resources out there. Google has a great unconscious bias resource. There's a free, I think it's hbr.org, that you can go through it, and it'll answer some questions, and it'll give you more insight on what your biases may be. And so step one overall. And I would say step two, well, kind of multiple steps, but really just exposing yourself to different perspectives. So one of the, and I think this like initial parts are what you can do for yourself in that recognition. And so understanding diverse perspectives as well. And this may be kind of in a, um, there's the general understanding and learning, and then I'll touch on to like tangible actions as well. But the diverse perspectives is the Women's Network. What we've done, especially in the last years, hear all these podcasts you can listen to, hear all these books, hear all these films, especially. promoting anti-racist resources throughout last year. But taking the time, and it takes effort, right? It takes effort, and so if you sit and do nothing, you're not going to be able to make progress. And so, but at the same time, it's so critical to learn other people's perspectives. And so, whether it's accessing those resources, whether it's getting coffee with somebody in a different demographic and just learning their backgrounds and building those relationships. Another very easy thing that I encourage everyone to dish is join an employee resource group that's not in your demographic. I know I lead the women's network, so I'm in every single resource group, but it's important for you to meet those people, talk to them, hear their perspectives, and learn how you can be an ally to that specific demographic too, right? It's not going to exactly be the same for every single person. And so those are pretty, I would say, it takes effort, but not too much effort, right? And I think some tactical examples, just from, I'd say, kind of in the workplace, it's being okay, biases, perspectives. I think for something for women, that I talk to sometimes on specific examples on, their studies show that women get interrupted more, by both men and women. And so one kind of easy way to be an ally, and of course it's not just for women, but an easy way to be an ally is if someone gets interrupted, speak up and make sure that they can, finish their sentence. Another thing is making sure that when, somebody, especially women, provide a good idea, or make a intelligent comment, like make sure that she's given credit, for that idea, whether it's reiterating like, oh, thank you, Paresa, like that's a really, great idea, thank you for contributing, and then making sure in subsequent conversations that she or he gets that credit. And then of course if you see people, make, prejudiced comments. If you're comfortable, raise your hand and say something. Of course, depending on the situation and who, maybe that's something where you pull that person aside and have a private conversation later. Or, maybe it's something where you kind of question it in the moment. Another, again, key example is just with gender biases and stereotypes over time. Women tend to be, given the task of like taking notes or cleaning the kitchen area in the office and stuff like that. Just don't, I think just don't assume and don't ask a woman every single time to do that. And so if it is taking notes, just be deliberate and have rotating schedules of everybody in the room will take notes kind of each day. And don't assume that women are going to clean up after you. I know that one's a little bit more extreme, but it may happen less often. But those kind of things are super important, and just some kind of key tangible examples.
Oh, those are great. I think it's so important to have the tangible, uh, you know, the actual activities that you could walk away with and implement today, as you go about, your workday. So great insights. Let's go ahead and take a quick break, and we will be right back after this short message.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I am here with Allison Moy with Sling TV and the president of Dish Women's Network. Thanks for being with us, Allison. So let's pick up on this conversation. It's very interesting. I want to go back to kind of what you were saying at the beginning. You know, when you first started your career, you didn't even really realize that you were doing all of this alone until somebody reached out and kind of pulled you up in a sense. So I feel like that plays into the unconscious side a little bit from both sides, because you have people who are like, I support women, like I want women to have the same pay grade. I don't have an unconscious bias, right? And then it's also women who think, you know, I'm not being treated differently or I'm not being paid differently. So it's really kind of just until you shine a light on it and really acknowledge it. It's something that isn't really obvious in a lot of cases, right? So I want to go back to the people who have pulled you up in that sense. So let's touch on mentorship really quick, because it is so important for people, especially coming into their career, to have the right mentor. So how can somebody find a mentor? Where should they look? Should they just go up to somebody and ask them, can you mentor me? Or what's the best way to approach that situation?
Yeah, there's definitely not one way, for sure. I think there's, and the way that I talk about mentorship is, while I think I would say 80% of the work should be done by the mentor, give or take. And so it definitely, you need to take the steps and you need to take the responsibility and energy towards finding mentors. And not only once you find it, putting effort into those conversations and being direct and particular about what you want to gain from that mentorship. But at the same time, leaders should be actively seeking to be mentors as well. I think we need to have that mutual, people seeking that out in order to continue to drive towards more equality, and have more equal representation at leadership levels, right? And so I think there's, if I'm a mentor, and one way that I've found, and one way that I've been connected with mentees is, talk to your manager, because your manager can be your mentor, but if you're looking to uh, grow in specific skill areas, for instance, data analytics, and your boss doesn't have that skill, hey, I want to learn more about data analytics. Is there somebody that you can better connect me with, or have any of those recommendations? So that's something that you can ask your people that you already have relationships with, whether it's a manager, another senior leader on the team, in order to help connect you. I think as well, I always encourage people to, as busy as senior leaders are, vast majority are willing to spend 30 minutes a month, and spend time with you. And so while it may be uncomfortable, go ask that leader that you respect or admire, or that you want to learn from, and say, hey, I want to learn these things, and I think we could really benefit and have a mutual relationship. I'd love for you to be my mentor. And have that, or you can just start with a, hey, I'd love to grab coffee for 30 minutes with you, and build from there. Maybe they aren't the person that maybe you realize that somebody else could better fill in the skills, that you're looking for. And so just having a 30-minute coffee, I've never seen anybody say, no, I don't have time for a 30-minute coffee. So it does, you have to put yourself out there a little bit. But those are definitely some ways that you can do that. And at the same time too, I, as a leader on the team, will, very deliberately build relationships and grab 30 minutes with more junior people on the team, just to be an additional resource for them. And some of those relationships have grown into more mentorship. Some of them are kind of ad hoc. But I make sure to, specifically support women on the team. And then I also try to mentor, those that are in a different demographic than me as well. That's something that I encourage mentors all the time. Um, mentor somebody who, especially in an underrepresented group, but mentor somebody who's in a different demographic. Mentorship should be valuable to both the mentor and the mentee. And I think one other side of mentorship is a sponsorship. And so they're similar, but not the same. Mentors can be internal, external, across the board, building skills, building that relationship. Sponsorship is also critical. Someone can be a sponsor and a mentor to you, but sponsorship is somebody in your organization who is senior enough and can be your advocate for you in the room when you're not there. They'll be your advocate for when leadership's talking about promotions, when they're talking about talent planning, when they're talking about performance evaluations. And so actively seeking out and asking more senior leaders to be your sponsor is critical. Of course, ideally your performance and your output should also show for itself, but that's I would always recommend having those active and deliberate conversations, because at the end of the day, you may be doing great work, but don't expect leadership to know exactly what you're doing. And the more that you can be direct with leadership on, I want you to sponsor me in the room because I want to be a VP one day, or I want to be promoted, or I want to be considered kind of as part of that succession planning. Leadership may not know. And so having those conversations and having the guts to talk to them and make it known, makes it so there's no guesses as to what leadership thinks of you or understands your career aspirations to be.
Right. That's so important. And, again, it goes back to how important a gender diverse company is. I read a study that said the gender diverse companies are 15% more likely to perform above the national industry median. So it is directly related to performance, and you have a vested interest in bringing people up with you, if you are in a leadership role. So if you see somebody who has potential, if you see somebody who is performing at a high level and you want to bring them up, then bring them up, reach out. I mean, yes, you as an employee, you as somebody who wants to grow should pursue a mentor, of course, but you as a leader should also be keeping your eye out of who's up next, right? So tell me a little bit about what you think organizations, managers, leaders across the tech industry can start doing today to help drive diversity and inclusion within their teams.
Oh, yeah. Quite a few things. And I think too, and then you touched on it, but diverse teams, diversity is um, gender, it's race, it's background, it's skills, it's past industries. And so, diversity looks different, and can span a lot of different things. And you mentioned kind of in that stat already, diverse teams are more innovative. Diverse teams make better decisions, because not everyone is just saying yes in an agreement all the time, and they bring in different perspectives. Diverse teams drive more revenue. Executive teams and boards that are more diverse, or have at least boards that have more women on them, drive more revenue and are more successful companies. And it's not just because it's not because they're women, it's because those people happen to be women, bring different perspectives, and provide additional value, and help make better decisions. And so all of that's super important. And I think for what leaders and companies can do, a few different things. And McKinsey Company and Lean In Women in the Workplace study that they do every single year has a ton of resources in it. I'd recommend reading that. And this is where it's one of the places I get that feedback. So overall, I would say going back to the biases, incorporate, talk about biases, offer unconscious bias training, and have those be kind of initial steps. I think mentorship and sponsorship is really key, and I know we've already talked about those. I would say setting evaluation criteria in advance. Sounds kind of obvious, but when we are, and I talk with my leadership team when we're going through performance reviews, and we just did a PA cycle at Dish, and when we're going through succession planning, making sure that we are listing out in advance, whether it's for this role in product management versus product design, and when we're looking at the different levels, make sure that you have that criteria set in advance and say, hey, we are weighing these people against these skills and responsibilities to be as objective as possible and to remove, avoid as much bias in those decisions. So that's really key. And I think one stat that I talk about on my team is, doing making sure that we're comparing people, because at the end of the day, like that's what you have to do at an organization. But women are often hired for experience, and men are often hired or promoted for potential. And so that's something that, like we need to throw that out the window. Everyone has potential. You should probably look at both for everybody. But that plays into how we look at performance and evaluate. And so that, objective evaluation criteria in advance is one of those key ways. Other ways, hiring. Um, there are multiple ways that you can do it, from reviewing job descriptions, making sure that the language is, gender neutral, looking at one other statistic that has been, shared with me over time is women often only apply for positions if they meet 100% of the qualifications listed, whereas men apply if they meet at least 60%. And so, I always tell both men and women, apply even though you may not meet everything. Like, always apply. And then something that we've reviewed on the Sling side is, okay, if we have 40 different bullets on how people are going to be successful, that's more check boxes that people have to think that they fit into. And so, only focusing on what's really important in the job description is key. And then, putting together goals for having diverse slates. Making sure that you're interviewing multiple people, not just picking your favorite person. Ideally, interviewing at least one person, if not more, that is a woman, that is a minority, and at least having that, opening the door to, select the best person at the end of the day, but being deliberate and opening that door for others.
Right. I love that. Great advice. And then the last question I want to leave our listeners with is, obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic, and that's interestingly taken a toll on women in the workforce. So what have you seen, or what studies have you seen of what impact this pandemic has had on women in tech?
Yeah, we are in a crisis. I would say an economic crisis for the amount of women that are leaving the workforce. The more women, and you mentioned it, the more women in the economy and contributing, the better everybody is, the better the economy is. And so since last February, 2.4 million women have left the workforce, as compared to only 1.8 million men. Of course, a lot on both sides, but it's staggering. And the reasons are because women are being forced to choose between work and being at home, whether it's childcare or caregiving for the elderly. And those gender stereotypes and women doing more work and home is real. And it's forcing women to make those decisions when men less often are required to make that decision for their family. So it's, not only taking a toll on the workforce and the economy, but of course mental health. And that spans mental health. The impact of the pandemic has had is, spans everybody, but especially with women, and making that decision to leave the workforce, and, being expected to balance work at home, has definitely disproportionately impacted women. And all of the impact of the pandemic as well has impacted women of color even more significantly. And so there's a few different things that companies can do, but to keep it short, flexibility. Flexibility, I would say, is number one. Probably also number one, empathy. Lead with empathy. Treat your employees like humans. I know most companies are doing that, but it's, that empathy and having those direct conversations are critical. And that flexibility, whether it's working from home, working weird or varying hours. And I think that's something that, again, a lot of companies, not every company, but a lot of companies have done, and that will help keep more women, especially moms, in the workforce overall. And hopefully post pandemic, that is still the normal. Hopefully there is still that flexibility, because that impact was around before the pandemic, but the pandemic has only heightened it with the closing of schools, figuring out childcare, virtual schooling, and all of that. So flexibility, normalize kids being around, normalize letting people not work from 4 to 7 to make dinner. People can come back online later at night. So definitely that flexibility, and hopefully that's a more positive change that the pandemic has done. So that flexibility will hopefully continue once things are a bit back to normal.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Well, Absolutely amazing insights, Allison. So thank you so much for joining us on our podcast today. We look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.